I never thought I'd be the kind of person to post something like this, but here I am. I guess I just need to get this off my chest, and maybe, just maybe, someone out there can tell me I'm not the worst person in the world. Or maybe you'll all confirm that I am. Either way, here's my story. My name's Emily, and I'm 28 years old. I've been married to my husband, Jake, for 5 years. We met in college, and he's always been the steady, reliable type. He's a good man, really. He works hard, he's kind, and he loves me. But lately, things have been different. I don't know if it's the monotony of married life or if I'm just going through some kind of mid-20s crisis, but I've been feeling restless. Like something's missing. Enter Ryan. Ryan is Jake's best friend. They've known each other since high school, and he's been around for as long as I've known Jake. Ryan's the complete opposite of Jake, wild, unpredictable, and always up for a good time. He's the kind of guy who makes you feel alive just by being in the same room as him. And yeah, he's good looking. Like, really good looking. I never thought anything would happen between us. I mean, he's Jake's best friend. But then, one night, everything changed. It was a Friday night, and Jake had to work late. He's an accountant and it was tax season, so he'd been pulling long hours. Ryan had texted me earlier in the day, asking if I wanted to grab a drink. He said he was bored and needed someone to hang out with. I hesitated at first, but I figured, why not? It's just a drink with a friend, right? We met at this little dive bar on the edge of town. The kind of place where the lights are dim, and the music's just loud enough to make you lean in close to hear each other. Ryan was already there when I arrived, sitting at the bar with a beer in hand. He smiled when he saw me, and I felt that familiar flutter in my chest. We started talking, and before I knew it, we were laughing like old friends. Ryan has this way of making you feel like you're the only person in the room. He's a great listener, and he always knows just what to say to make you feel special. As the night went on, the drinks kept coming, and the conversation got more and more intimate. At some point, Ryan reached over and brushed a strand of hair out of my face. His hand lingered for a moment, and I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. I knew I should pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I looked into his eyes, and in that moment, I knew something was about to happen. We left the bar together, the air between us thick with tension. Ryan suggested we go for a drive, and I agreed without thinking. He led me to Jake's car, the one I'd driven to the bar. I hesitated for a second, but then I handed him the keys. He opened the passenger door for me, and I slid inside, my heart pounding in my chest. Ryan got behind the wheel, and we drove in silence for a while, the city lights passing by in a blur. I don't know where we were going, and I didn't care. All I could think about was the way Ryan's hand felt on my thigh as he shifted gears, the way his eyes kept darting over to me, dark and full of desire. Finally, he pulled into a deserted parking lot and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and fast, as Ryan turned to me. He didn't say anything, just leaned in slowly, giving me plenty of time to stop him. But I didn't. I closed my eyes, and then his lips were on mine, and everything else faded away. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. Ryan's kiss was hungry, desperate, and I matched his intensity. His hands were everywhere, and I couldn't get enough. We were a tangle of limbs, the seats of Jake's car pressing into my back as Ryan's body pressed into mine. It was wrong, so wrong, but it felt so right. When it was over, we sat in silence, the weight of what we'd done hanging heavy in the air. Ryan reached over and took my hand, but I pulled away. I couldn't look at him. All I could think about was Jake, and how much I'd betrayed him. Ryan drove me home, and I slipped into bed beside Jake, who was still asleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face. I felt sick to my stomach, not just because of what I'd done, but because I knew I couldn't take it back. The next morning, Jake kissed me goodbye before heading to work, none the wiser. I wanted to tell him, to confess everything, but I couldn't. I was too scared of losing him, too scared of what he'd think of me. Ryan and I haven't spoken since that night. He's tried to reach out, but I've ignored his calls and texts. I don't know if I'll ever be able to face him again. As for Jake, I'm trying to be the wife he deserves, but every time he looks at me, I feel like a fraud. So, Reddit, that's my story. I know I messed up, and I know I have to live with the consequences. But I just needed to get it out there, to admit what I've done. Maybe someday I'll find the courage to tell Jake the truth, but for now, I'm just trying to get through each day. Thanks for listening. I cheated on my husband with his best friend in his own car, and now I'm struggling with the guilt and the fear of losing everything. The days turned into weeks, and the guilt gnawed at me like a relentless beast. I tried to push the memories of that night to the back of my mind, but they kept resurfacing, especially when Jake was around. He was so kind, so loving, and it only made me feel worse. I started to avoid him, making excuses to stay late at work or go out with friends. I couldn't bear to look him in the eye, knowing what I had done. Ryan, on the other hand, was persistent. He kept texting me, asking to meet up, to talk. I ignored him at first, but eventually, I gave in. We met at a coffee shop, and the moment I saw him, all the feelings I had been trying to suppress came rushing back. He looked as handsome as ever, but there was a sadness in his eyes that mirrored my own. "Emily, we need to talk about what happened," he said, his voice low and serious. I nodded, unable to speak. We found a quiet corner and sat down, the tension between us palpable. "I can't stop thinking about you," Ryan admitted, his eyes searching mine. "I know what we did was wrong, but I can't help how I feel." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Ryan, we can't do this. Jake is your best friend. He trusts you. He trusts me." Ryan reached across the table and took my hand. "I know, Emily. But I can't pretend like nothing happened. I care about you. I think I'm falling in love with you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe him, to give in to the feelings I had been fighting, but I knew it would only make things worse. "Ryan, we can't," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "We just can't." He nodded, his expression filled with regret. "I understand. But if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." We parted ways that day, both of us knowing that we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I went home to Jake, determined to be the wife he deserved, but the guilt continued to eat away at me. One evening, Jake came home early from work, a rare occurrence during tax season. He had a bottle of wine in his hand and a smile on his face. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Just the two of us." I forced a smile, my heart aching with guilt. "That sounds great, Jake." We sat down to dinner, and for the first time in weeks, we actually talked. Jake told me about his day, about the stress of work, and how much he missed spending time with me. I listened, my heart breaking with every word. "Emily, I feel like we've been drifting apart," Jake said, his voice filled with concern. "I don't want to lose you." I felt a surge of emotion, and before I could stop myself, the words came tumbling out. "Jake, there's something I need to tell you." He looked at me, his eyes filled with worry. "What is it, Emily?" I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. I cheated on you." The room fell silent, the weight of my confession hanging in the air. Jake stared at me, his expression unreadable. I braced myself for his anger, for his hurt, but instead, he just looked sad. "With who?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, but I knew I had to tell him the truth. Ryan. Jake's face turned pale, and he looked away, his hands clenched into fists. Ryan? My best friend? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I'm so sorry, Jake. I never meant for this to happen. I love you, and I don't want to lose you. Jake stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I need some time to think, he said, his voice shaking. I don't know if I can forgive you for this. He walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my guilt and regret. I sat there, crying, knowing that I had destroyed the one thing that mattered most to me. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Jake moved into the guest room, and we barely spoke. I tried to give him the space he needed, but it was killing me to see him so hurt. Ryan, on the other hand, continued to reach out, but I ignored him. I couldn't face him, not after what had happened. I knew that if I saw him, I would only be tempted to make the same mistake again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake came to me one evening, his expression serious. Emily, we need to talk, he said, sitting down across from me. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm listening. Jake took a deep breath, his eyes filled with pain. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've decided that I want to try to work through this. I love you, Emily, and I don't want to lose you. But I need you to be honest with me. I need you to cut Ryan out of your life completely. I felt a surge of relief, but also a pang of sadness. I knew that cutting Ryan out of my life would be hard, but I also knew that it was the only way to save my marriage. I'll do whatever it takes, Jake, I said, my voice filled with determination. I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Jake nodded, his expression softening. I believe you, Emily. But this is going to take time. We need to rebuild the trust that was broken. I reached across the table and took his hand, tears streaming down my face. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Jake. I just want us to be happy again. The road to rebuilding our marriage was long and difficult, but we took it one day at a time. Jake and I started going to couples therapy, and we worked on communicating better and rebuilding the trust that had been broken. As for Ryan, I kept my promise to Jake and cut him out of my life completely. It was hard, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I focused on my marriage, on being the wife Jake deserved, and slowly but surely, we started to heal. It's been a year since that night, and while things aren't perfect, they're better. Jake and I are closer than ever, and I've learned to forgive myself for the mistakes I made. I know that I can't change the past, but I can control the future, and I'm determined to make the most of it. So, Reddit, that's my story. It's not a happy one, but it's mine. I hope that by sharing it, I can help someone else avoid making the same mistakes I did. And if you're going through something similar, just know that it's never too late to make things right. Thanks for listening. TLDR, I cheated on my husband with his best friend in his own car, confessed, and worked through the aftermath to rebuild our marriage. It's been a long and difficult journey, but we're finally starting to heal.